contradictory, but I want to make a different kind of video than the playthrough videos I've been making before. I want to pause and talk a little bit about an element to this game that um, it's something I have to think about and work my way through every time I pick up a game in this series again. I tend to play this with physical copies. In fact, this is the first time I've ever played it on Vassal. What I tend to do is just pick up a physical copy, and in each copy, in all my copies of the series that I own, there's a copy of the series rules, and so I just tend to like pick a box, look at the series rules that are in the box, and just play with those. On this playthrough, I'm using Series Rules 3.2, which is the final stage of the series rules, and all the games are backward compatible to that. But anyways, one of the things I think I make different decisions about at different times I play a game in this series is the rules governing the movement and non-movement of headquarters counters and the movement or non-movement of division leaders when the division is working under a divisional goal. I think I said, for instance, in an early video in this series that an order to a corps should include the resting place, the destination of the headquarters of the corps for purposes of executing the order, like where to a specific hex that the headquarters will move to and stop at that point. I now, just like in rereading the rules, I now think that that is not correct. But what I want to do is is to focus on the actual sections of the rules that deal with these questions, and then talk my way through to like a final decision about how I'm going to handle the movement of headquarters pieces and the movement of divisional leaders when the division is working under a divisional order. Remember that there are no divisional headquarters pieces. There's just corps headquarter pieces and army headquarter pieces. First, let's think about the movement of army headquarters, because that's, I think, the one that's the most pinned down. You'll find a discussion of that and again, I'm in the series rules version 3.2, which you can download from Multiman Publishing, and it's in section 10.6a of that rule set. So what it says is Army Headquarter Movement. The Army HQ can only move if it has orders to do so. The orders must require the headquarters to move to a specific hex. These orders, aid oral type for practical purposes, must come from the Army commander while he is stacked with the HQ. The headquarters accepts these orders as if it was a leader with a 2 rating. The Army headquarters cannot use initiative to move itself. So, for instance, what that means is that if I, as the Confederate player, decide, wearing my brag hat, decide that I want to move the Army of the Tennessee headquarters, say, from its current location here to, say, to Alexander's, I think this is Alexander's Mill, if I remember right. This is Alexander's Bridge, and I think this is a mill here. What I would have to do is I would have to write an order, using command points, rolling on the acceptance table. For purposes of that order, the Army HQ would have a command rating, as it were, of 2. And I would have to roll on the table, and very likely to end up in delay, just like an order to a corps or a division would. So so to move the Army headquarters, that requires a specific order, and that order must specify the exact hex that headquarters counter must end its movement on. I'm not allowed to leave the destination hex fuzzy in any way. Now, at times I think I've overextended that idea to the idea of the movement of corps headquarters. There's two separate places I could find in the rules that deal with the movement of corps headquarters. One is in 10.0C. And it's right at the very end of that section. And it says, generally, corps headquarter movement is strictly dependent on the current orders of their corps. HQs may not move without orders to move. Now, I think at times I've seen that sentence and seized on it and thought, aha. So the same rule for Army headquarters also applies to corps headquarters. They need an order to move. However, the next sentence says, if a corps has orders, the HQ may move freely within them. Separate orders covering the HQ are not necessary. So one takeaway from that is that, and for instance, we issued an order for First Corps to essentially attack Davis's division here. That does not require one order to the corps and then a separate order to the corps headquarters. The headquarters, moves along with the other elements of the corps, in pursuant of the order that First Corps is acting on. Now, however, I think at times, and an example of that is when I started this playthrough, I was thinking, okay, it doesn't require a separate order, but just like for the Army HQ, if I'm moving a Corps HQ, that order to the Corps has to include the destination of the Corps HQ. However, I no longer think that that's what Dean Essig, the series designer, intends. Let me read the other passage that I find in the series rules that's relevant to the movement of corps headquarters, and you can find that in 10.1G. 10.1H. I was going to say G, but it's actually H. And unfortunately, the subject heading of 10.1H is actions which do not require orders. So it's, in a different location than the first passage I read. I wouldn't necessarily expect to find this here. But after Dean lists, a series of actions that don't require an order or need to be mentioned in orders to be conducted, or maybe I'm starting to see now why he did put it in this section. Well, it says, after he gives a list, 1 through 5, then it says, note, once a corps headquarters is in position, it is literally, quotation mark, bolted to the ground, end quotation mark, and cannot be moved short of new orders, initiative, or emergency retreat. Headquarters may move along freely during the execution of an attack order or other orders which require movement, but are again bolted to the ground when their orders are fulfilled. Now, I want to unpack this a bit. The simplest remark there is the remark, because I say it's simplest in that it seems to accord perfectly with the previous rule we read. Headquarters may move along freely during the execution of an attack order or other orders which require movement. So far that seems like perfectly in accord with the previous rule we reread. But the first sentence here says once a corps headquarters is, and here I'm quoting for emphasis, in position, it is literally bolted to the ground and cannot be moved short of new orders, initiative, or emergency retreat. Now, I can't find anywhere in the rules that defines the notion of a corps headquarter like being in position. What does that mean? And I think at times the way I've interpreted it is that, well, what in position means is in the location the order to the corps specifies. And then the other thing it says is that the headquarters may move freely, when during the execution of an attack order or other orders which require movement, but are again bolted to the ground when their orders are fulfilled. So does Dean mean by I think I have a good intuitive understanding of what it means when a set of orders are fulfilled. But does that mean the same thing as that when the HQ is in position? I think I couldn't say it's obviously wrong to play the game under, thinking that, as I started the series with, that if I give an order to a corps, that order has to include the exact hex that the corps headquarters is gonna park in, as it were, and bolt itself to the ground, so to speak, once it gets there. However, I think a slightly more liberal interpretation is that the order to the corps does not have to specify, in advance, as it were, the hex that the corps headquarters is going to settle in, but rather, as I prosecute the order to the corps, as I execute it, at a certain point, I have to pick a location for the corps headquarters and say, okay, this is where I'm bolting down the corps headquarters for purposes of continuing to execute this order. So for instance, if I'm executing, well, in the order I gave to First Corps, I specified this hex here as the hex that the First Corps headquarters would put itself in, the exact same hex that the divisional leader Johnson is currently in. I now think that the sense I'm getting through this, at least through this read through of the rules, is that I don't think the order, unlike, again, an army headquarters, the corps headquarters, I don't need to specify the hex in advance, but at a certain point I do need to make a decision and bolt it down. And one of the reasons I think this is because when you look at examples of orders that Dean actually provides in the series rules, he says the following are all acceptable orders. Each was written with a minimum of detail to show the rough structure of orders and to convince players that no large amount of writing is required. So the first one, take your corps and move down the Battery Road to the Thomas House. When you get there, set up a defensive line facing north. That's an example of a simple order. Or here's an example of a complex order. Move via the Thomas House on the Green Road to attack the enemy in the vicinity of the Big Hill. Attack to capture the Big Hill. Obviously neither of those two orders specifies a particular hex that the corps headquarters has to bolt themselves down to. So just trying to put all this together, again, I'm going to settle on the idea that I do have to bolt down the corps headquarters, as I'm prosecuting the order, but I don't have to specify in the order to the corps in advance, as it were, where that happens. Just at a certain point, I have to pick one, and once I make that decision, that's the one I have to live with. I'm not allowed to move the headquarters anymore. Now, where this gets interesting is when we think about uh, the function of divisional leaders when the division is working under a divisional goal. And the relevant section of the rules that discusses that is 10.5D. And it took me a long time to find this. The title of 10.5D is No Core Organization. So it's in a at least from my perspective, unexpected location. So anyways, 10.5D says, no core organization. In games where there is no functioning core HQs or when divisions are off on divisional goals, the divisional commander functions like a core HQ. He is bolted to the ground when there are no orders requiring movement, just like a core HQ. When this rule is applied, the divisional commander is freed from the must stack with one of his brigades restriction. So the way I interpret that is, I mean, what I'm really focusing the most on is this idea that, like, when a division is operating under, has accepted and is acting on a divisional goal, that divisional leader functions just like a core HQ, meaning that the same rules apply to that divisional leader that would apply to a divisional HQ. So following that line of thought, and I've probably been a little bit loose with Stewart's division in this respect. I think in executing the divisional goal Stewart has to seize the Lafayette Road between the Botherton and the Brock House, I need to be a little bit more rigorous and choose a location for the counter representing Stewart to fix himself and not move from that. And I think one thing that would mean, and I don't think I've violated this, is that I think that rule would block me, say, from allowing Stewart to participate in a close combat. There is an advantage, if it's permitted, of course, to if you do a close combat, to include your divisional leader in there, because based on the size of the leader rating of the divisional leader, you're allowed to, when you're rolling for morale, you're allowed to resolve the close combat. You're allowed to move up on the you take the rating, subtract 1, and move up that number of rows on the morale table when the attacker rolls for morale. So essentially, what this boils down to is that if I issue an order, if I issue a divisional goal to a division, I'm not really allowed to use that leader in things like close combat. I'm going to bolt down at a certain location the divisional leader, just like I would bolt down the HQ of a corps in executing its order. Now, I don't think there's anything that prevents me, say, from bolting down that divisional leader in a hex that's within an enemy zone of control. Like, I think it would be completely legitimate for me in the upcoming Confederate turn to move to include in the movement, moving Stewart into this hex right here, or this hex right here. I think that is permitted according to the rules, but I think at a certain point, sort of intuitive point, and this is, I think, the idea that Dean is trying to get across with his remark about Corps headquarters, that once the Corps HQ is in position, I've got to like pick a position, as it were, where Stuart will conduct the battle. Um, the kind of intuitively, the way I read that is that's not going to allow me to then actually advance, the like the command nexus, as it were, of the division, executing the divisional order actually into, an enemy hex. That would seem to, I think, violate the spirit of the idea that the divisional leader has to function like a headquarters for the division. So that's the way I'm going to play it in the subsequent videos. So in the future, when I'm issuing a core order or a divisional goal, I won't specify in advance the hex that the core headquarter or the divisional leader will have to occupy, but in the course of executing the order, at a certain point, I will designate a certain hex as the order where the core headquarter or the divisional leader will bolt themselves to the ground and operate from. And of course, that bolting does not mean that the headquarters cannot retreat, just as a command with an order to advance allows the core headquarters or the divisional leader to advance along with the other units. Also, if the other units are thrown back due to a retreat, then that core headquarters or divisional leader is allowed to retreat along with it. And there's actually rules governing I believe, the retreat of a core headquarter. If it happens during this playthrough, then we'll discuss those. I hope this video is useful for those of you out there who are still interested in this series and who maybe wrestle with this novel concept of a headquarters unit. I mean, it's not that the Civil War Brigade Series is the only game system with headquarters units, but this particular way of using headquarters units, I certainly don't think in my own gameplay of this series I've been consistent in how I've used those particular pieces, but I'm going to type up myself out a note and staple it to my hopefully like permanent printout of the series rules 3.2 and use in all my subsequent playthroughs, so I can take a consistent approach and all the times in the future I play games in this series. I hope this video was useful, and in my next video I will pick up the gameplay with the Confederate phase of the 1600 turn.